Welcome everybody to today's ILTA webinar, Scalable Smart Products with Azure Data Lake and Power Platform. I'm Nicole and I'll be serving as a moderator. We are joined today by Cassie and Adi, and the presentation will run about 45 to 60 minutes. We ask you to submit any questions you have into the Q&A box, and if they are not addressed during the presentation, we will address them at the end. Before we start, please also know that we're recording today's webinar and we'll post a link to our website under recording shortly after today's presentation. At the end of the presentation, we also ask you to take a few moments to complete the evaluation that will appear on your screen. I'll now turn the webinar over to Adi.
Thank you, Nicole, and hi everyone. Thank you for taking the time to join our webinar today. My name is Adi, and together with me is my dear friend and colleague, Cassie. We both work for Microsoft and part of the Azure engineering org. So today we're going to talk about what are smart products, what does it mean to scale smart product, and how we can leverage tools like Azure Data Lake and Power Platform to do it without coding at all. So I hope you're excited. I recommend you to take either a piece of paper or your favorite note app to take some notes so you can later on follow-ups with questions. So what are smart products? Well, smart products can be considered everything that help us with making our life easier. It can be a smart PDF scanner, which scans PDF files and transfers them directly to an organized table, and later on gives us access to insights on top of these files. Or maybe a voice-to-text feature that can enable us to do other fun things. And smart products can also be considered as a digital representation of almost any physical entity and its parameters over time. So now that we know a little bit what are smart products, what are scalable smart products? Well, scalable smart products are products or solutions that can be used by many and can handle many customers and potentially endless amount of data. When we talk about scalable hardware or software, we usually refer to the software or the hardware being able to support increasing in workload. And this capability allows our computer equipment and software programs to grow over time. Many times we refer to it as distributed systems because we not only work on one machine, now we're referring to we work with multiple machines with distributed systems. And this is great, but how do we make everything work together? So today I'm happy to introduce you to a fun concept named machine learning pipelines with big data. But what are machine learning pipelines and how is it relevant to big data? So we already know we want to achieve our scalable smart products. And we are actually going to use machine learning techniques to design and get smart products. And a machine learning pipeline is used to help us automate the machine learning workloads. And they operate by enabling us to do a sequence, running a sequence of data and transformers on top of the data to fit it into something called a machine learning model that later on we can test and evaluate and use. In our use case, we're going to see how machine learning is going to help us with processing and extracting data from PDF files. So this is the high level of machine learning pipelines with big data, and this is the area that we're going to touch today in order to build our scalable smart products. And you're probably curious to better understanding what is big data. When we talk about big data, there is a tendency to overcomplicate the terms. We use things like the 3 V's, the volume, velocity, variety. It's true, they are important. But at the end of the day, we need to remember that data actually means all kind of data, just big. Many times, one of the criteria for the system we're building is to be able to tackle various types of data, such as PDF files, CSV files, photos, videos, doc files, and many more. And for doing it, we need to think and to come up with a structure of how we want to do it. and also define what kind of file types we are allowing in our system. What are we allowing to save, and what's going to be the best format for us to save these files. And that brings me to the area of how we work with big data. And in order for us to work efficiently with big data, we should keep it under structure and also make sure we're automating the process. And when we define automating the process, we need to understand new concepts like data lake. And a data lake is a system or repository of data that's stored in its natural raw format, usually object blobs. We can also hear the different terms of data objects or different files. And a data warehouse is a system used for reporting and data analytics. And it's usually considered the core component of business intelligence and also the main engine for some of our machine learning models. And data warehouse are central repositories of our integrated data from one or more disparate sources. So it means we can take a lot of data from different APIs, from different sources, and kind of combine them into our tables and save everything into our data warehouse in a structured manner. But how do we take the data lake from the raw format, from the multiple types format that we work with, and bring it all the way to be structured? For doing that, we use something called data pipelines. And data pipelines is a set of data processing elements that connects everything together, and the output is one element that we can save in our data warehouse. And the elements of this pipeline are often executed in parallel or in time-sliced fashion or in a distributed manner. And all of that enable us to run over massive amount of data and through the pipeline, give them an order and a structure. So we now understand that in order to take our raw data and turn it into actionable data that we can work with, we need to use these data pipelines. And we need to organize our data. So what is the best way to organize our data? This is a high-level generic approach. So we already know we have the raw data. This is the data that comes into the system, that we're injecting into the system. It's our primary data. Sometimes it goes through privacy or different cleaning in the beginning. And the second one, we want to put it into a pipeline and move it into a process stage. And the process stage is our data after file type transformation and structuring. And this next stage will be the refine stage. It's usually after we remove things like data variability, redundancy. Maybe we enriched and ran some join operation on top of multiple tables to get a better view of what's going on in the process in our data. And later on, this refined data going to help us with our machine learning tools, going to help us create those smart products. And it's also the backbone of our business intelligence tools, of our BI tools. And when we design this kind of data systems, we need to take multiple considerations. We should understand what the file format and content. Do you want to work with that structure, the raw, processed, or refined? Or maybe we have some semi-processed data in the middle. What are the type format that we support? If it's a CSV, it's a PDF, it's JSON file. What are we allowing in our system? What is the architecture that we want to work with? Sometimes we would like to work with multiple data systems, and the reason for it might be privacy. Let's say I have customers in Germany and I need to save their data. And due to GDPR, I have to save their data in their local country in Germany. So maybe I need to have a data system that is based in Germany. What is the physical design and security around it? What kind of security? How do I access my data? Who is allowed to access my data on what time? What is the frequency of read and write? Do I need to access this data on real time? Like for every request that a user interacts with my system, I need to enable it to go to the data? Or do I work with a batch format? something like reports that I produce every hour or every day or every week. So what is the frequency in read and write? It's also going to impact how do I define this storage. If it's going to be a hot storage, something that I need fast access to, or a cold storage. So this is all the data system considerations that we need to think about when we're designing our data systems. And one of the tools to do that is Azure Data Lake Storage Generation 2. And Azure Data Lake Storage Generation 2 is part of the Microsoft Azure Cloud products. And it's considered to be one of the world's most productive data lake. It combines the power of Hadoop compatible file system. And Hadoop compatible file system is a distributed file system that's designed to run on commodity hardware. And this is combined with the massive scale and economy of the Azure Blob Storage that actually help us speed the transition from proof of concept to production. And it also connects to core capabilities from the Azure Data Lake Storage Generation 1, such as the Azure Active Directory. And Azure Active Directory is a Microsoft Cloud-based identity and access managed services which helps your employees sign in and access resource. And of course, more security features as well. And it scales up to exabyte. So we don't need to consider about the scalability of that. When we look at the Hadoop ecosystem, we can define it into two areas. We have the analytics part, and then we have the storage part. Today, we're going to talk about the storage part of the Hadoop, but Azure Data Lake supports both the analytics and the storage. And we interact with the storage using something called Web HDFS. HDFS stands for Hadoop Distributed File System. And Web HDFS is a tool that provides web service access to data stored in HDFS. And at the same time, it retains the security and native protocol that HDFS offers to use that parallelism and better throughput to access our data. Another great feature that the Azure Data Lake provides us is something called hierarchical namespaces. And you can decide when you project an Azure Data Lake Generation 2 if you want to enable it or not. And hierarchical namespaces provide something called atomic directory manipulation. And that means that you can create an object stores with directory hierarchy by embedding slashes. And this is convenient for organizing data objects and provide the behavior of moving, renaming, deleting directories. Imagine if we don't have it, and we are talking about distributed data that is not only in one machine, it's actually in multiple machines. So when we need to delete a directory, it requires our compute to go over all the files in all the different machines that we have and make a decision of whether to delete it or not, which might be compute heavy, versus hierarchical namespace that allows to do it in one operation, one task, by updating one single entry, the parent directory. Without that, it can take longer time and it can impact our analytics process later on. And deciding on whether to enable it or not is directly dependent on the nature of how we're building and designing our data systems. How we are going to run compute, what kind of framework we are going to run it. Different frameworks are going to give us different optimizations. And the reason for that is how the different frameworks work with different big data workloads. And again, each framework has its own way of processing the data itself. So let's take a look and see how we can start in Azure Data Lake. Fun. So I prepared a quick video for you. So here we're looking at the Azure portal, and I went to something called storage account. So I am creating a new storage account. And one of the basic storage accounts is the blob storage that we know. So we are going to start a blob storage. Let's click the add one. We'll define the subscription that you want to work with. And also the resource group that we want to work with. And later on, we're going to give it a name. Intro to big data, we're going to define it in the US. And we're going to define what kind of access tier we want it to be, if it's going to be premium or not. And then we're going to advance. Now we just defined the blob storage itself. It's like the basic storage that we have on Azure. And now we're going to advance and we're going to tell it, now I want to make it into a data lake storage generation 2. And I want to get the capabilities of data lake storage generation 2. So under the advanced tab, I'm going to go to data lake storage generation 2, and I'm going to do enable. This will enable for me the data lake storage generation 2 with the hierarchical namespace. I'm going to click create. It's going to test and validate everything for me. And now I can create it. You can see our deployment is on the way. Yep, and now we can go to the resource. So this is how it looks like when we have the storage account. And here we can see the containers, and we can see different things like file shares, tables, queues. The thing we care about is our containers, because here we're going to start build the structure. So under containers, I can click the plus here, and then it's going to open for me a new container. So I'm going to give it a name. I'm going with raw, the access level, who can access it, and press and create. And later on, I'm going to continue, and then the processed one, and also the refined one, because these are the containers that I defined in my system. Cool. So this is how I deployed my Azure Data Lake Generation 2. So now that we have a storage account, and we know it's scalable and it can support our workloads, now let's see how we can actually create the pipeline, how we automate it, and how we work with machine learning without writing a single line of code. Cassie, take it from here.
Awesome. Let me share my screen here. All right, you can see my slide?
Yes.
Okay. So thank you so much for that amazing introduction to big data. I feel like I definitely have a better idea about it, but now you're like, okay, I have all this data, but what do I do with it? And maybe you don't have a data scientist. There's something that we can do called robotic process automation, or business process automation might be something that you've heard of before. And there's tools within this that will allow us to build a data pipeline. So taking our raw data, processing it, extracting the data, putting it into a data source, and then being able to run processes on that without writing any code. So we're going to be using something called the Power Platform, and we're going to be using Power Automate within that. And if you don't know what that is, that's okay, because I'm going to show you. And then we're going to be using cognitive services, which are our machine learning pre-built models. Forward. Okay. So first, let's just get a little bit of an introduction to our Power Platform. So here we have the different tools within the Power Platform, which is Power BI, Power Apps, Power Automate, and Power Virtual Agents. Yeah, it's a lot of power at your fingertips. Sorry, I have to make some power jokes because it's just a little too easy. Anyway, so Power BI you may be used to before, or you've probably used it before. It's a data-driven analytics. It's very, very useful. There's actually some pre-built machine learning stuff within that you can connect to different data sources as well. Power Apps is our platform to build applications with no code or no code. And then we also have Power Automate, which is what we're going to be using, which will create workflows that will process our data, use our machine learning model that we're going to create with cognitive services, And then we have our virtual agents. So virtual agents allow you to create a conversational bot without writing any code as well. So you can see why we would call it powerful, because that's a lot of powerful things without having to code. Okay, sorry, I'll try to lay off the power. Okay, so the machine learning model that we're going to be using is called the Form Recognizer. And the Form Recognizer is part of our cognitive service suite, which is a suite of pre-built machine learning models that you can just grab and use. So Form Recognizer, let's take a little bit of a look at what that looks like. So this is just on our Microsoft page. You can see, you can go and kind of test out the different ones to see how they work. So if we scroll down, we can actually take a look at the Form Recognizer and how it works with some different sample data that they've provided. So here we have a PDF on the left here. And then on the right, you have a preview of what that data looks like after we put it through the Form Recognizer. And then we also have the JSON available for us as well, so it's extracting our key and values from our PDF. Now we can also look at receipts and get data from receipts. It takes, I think, a lot of different, I can't like list all the different data formats, but it takes a lot of different data formats to extract data out of your form. So the one that we're going to be obviously looking at is PDFs, and in particular PDF invoices. Okay, so let's take a look at how we can do this with Power Automate. So right now we're looking at the Azure portal, and we already saw Adi create the Intro to Big Data storage account. And you'll see another service here called the Form Recognizer, which is the cognitive service that I've already created. Now, in order to create the cognitive service, it's like any other thing in Azure. You go create resource, you fill in the appropriate information, you click create. So nothing too exciting or different there that you need to be aware of. So now let's go to Power Automate, and this is where we're actually going to build our machine learning pipeline and extract the data from those PDFs to a data source of your choice. So if I hit new, we can see the different options that are available that you can, of how you would trigger your flow. So you can do, UI flow, you can trigger it from Power Apps, scheduled, instant, automated. We want to do instant from blank, and we're going to trigger this basically manually for training our model. So if I hit instant from blank, it's going to ask me for a name. I'm just going to name it, what am I going to name it? Train model PDF. Probably could name it better, but you want to do something descriptive because you could get a lot of different flows when you're in there. So for the train model, so we're going to create two flows. This is the first one, and this one is going to be the one that we're actually going to train the cognitive service with our data set. So we want to trigger this manually, and we'll click create. So another thing I want to show you is Adi showed you how you can create containers and manage it through the Azure portal. We also have something called the Azure Storage Explorer, which allows you to navigate through all your different storage accounts on a client that you download onto your desktop. So if we look at the Intro to Big Data one that Adi created, we can see the different containers, or you can think of them as like folders too if you want, that were created, and then we can take a look at our data. So we have our raw data that we want to process and extract the data from, and then we have data that we've already processed here. And then we have our trained data. So in our trained data, these are the 5 PDFs that we're going to be using to train our model. And that's all you need. You only need 5 examples to actually train the Form Recognizer on your data, which is pretty sweet, right? So from there, let's take a look at our invoice. And so we just kind of have a better idea of what we're looking for, what that's going to look like when we're done. So we have the entities that we're going to be extracting. So we have the name of the person that's being invoiced, the company, invoice number, email, values, pretty standard invoice data. So this gives you an idea when you see the JSON extract that we get, what it looks like in PDF form. Cool. So now we know what our data looks like. We know how to navigate a little bit in Azure Storage Explorer. Now let's go and build out our machine learning model with Power Automate. So you can add steps, and there's a lot of different pre-built plugins and steps that you can use within Power Automate. So we're going to use Form Recognizer. So there's actually one created for Form Recognizer Cognitive Service, so you don't have to set up the HTTP one yourself, which there actually is a step that you can set up your own HTTP. So if you want to call your own API that you've created, you could as well. Or maybe your own machine learning model if you have a data scientist. So let's go to the ellipsis here and see that what my connections are. So I've already created my connection to the form recognizer resource that we looked at, but I can also click new connection and I can give it a name, I can give it an endpoint and an account key, and then that's how it'll authenticate and connect to my resource. So if we went back to Azure here, I can show you where you can get that information. So let's click into our form recognizer resource. And the quick start takes a minute to load here, but I want to point it out because it gives you some different resources. Like if you're new to Azure, you're new to cognitive services, in the quick start of the resource, you can get information about it from C# quick starts, Python, maybe if you're going to be using it in an application, and go straight to the docs as well. So in the overview here, we can see that we have the endpoint, and then also on the left, if we hit keys and endpoint, that will give us the key that we need in order to authenticate with the form recognizer. So we just click add, we'd add that information here, and that's all we have to do to connect to our machine learning model. So the next thing it needs is the source information. So we need to give it that training data that we want it to learn from. So to do that, I'm gonna jump over to my Storage Explorer, and you can see here we have the data lake storage container, and then also the not data lake storage container above it. And there's a little bit of a difference here when you're going to get the SAS URLs in order to connect the two. In the non-data lake one, I'm actually able to right click and just get shared access signature because the permissions are different and the security is different. So you're getting the added security with the Azure Data Lake. So with the one that's not data lake, you would go in here, you would select the permissions, you'd click create, and you'd get a URL that you could then plop in to your source in order to train your model. But for the data lake one, we're actually gonna go back to the portal. And if you go back to storage account, resource group, let's go back to storage account. There we go. So if you go here, you actually have a shared access signature. And within here, we can generate that. We can decide the permissions. Let's just select all object container service and then click generate that SAS URL. And then grab the blob service SAS URL. That's the one we want to use. So we'll go ahead and copy that. We'll go back to our flow and then we will paste that in. And then the other thing that we need is this brings us to our storage account, but we need to tell it which folder, so our container. We want to do the train folder and then we want to slash everything. So we're saying we want everything in our train container to use on this particular one. Cool. So we've given it our data source. If we take a look, as we saw before, here's our training that we're grabbing for the for training our model. We can click save and then click test. And we're just gonna trigger it from right here to train our model and make sure that everything's working. So we'll click save and test, continue, and train our model. So we are now training a machine learning model that we created with Azure that we didn't have to write any code for to learn from our PDF data set in order to now send it to create a workflow that can extract the data from these PDFs. I've done this with code. It takes a lot longer with code. I've done document classification models where you had to train it and clean it and everything. So it's really, really powerful that you can just create a service, grab it, and create a model. So now we have a model ID and we want to grab this model ID. We're going to put it in a notepad because we're going to need it later for the next flow that we're going to create that we're actually going to do our data pipeline with. So this was our training model flow. The next flow that we're going to do is the one that's actually going to train our model. So how that one's going to work is we are going to grab, all the data in our raw folder. We're going to loop through each item. We're going to grab the value of that item. Then we're going to copy it to a processed folder, and we're going to apply the machine learning model to extract that data. Now, I'm not actually going to extract the data into a data source. I'll show you some of the different data sources that you have available. But you have a lot of different options, and it really depends on what you need and what you want to do with yours. So I'll show you the process of getting the data to the JSON format. From there, you would put your own step in to actually put that in whatever data source you're using. So if I click on the create on the left here, you can see the different templates that are available. And so like the other thing is like, you can do not just machine learning, you can do all kinds of processes in here. And it's cool that they have different options available to kind of get you started in templates to help you understand. So we actually want to do a scheduled process here because we want this to run, let's say, every day. And it would really depend on your pipeline and how often you want it to run it. Maybe you want it to run every hour, maybe you want it to run every minute. But basically, every time it runs, it would be checking for new data in that raw folder that needs to be processed, extracted, and put into your data source. So we'll call it data pipeline PDF process. We're going to say we want it to run every day at 10 a.m. and we'll click create. So now we know this is scheduled to run every day. So the next thing that we want to do is connect to our blob. So we want to do a list blob source. So if we click list blob, we can see now we have the Azure Blob Storage widget that we want to select. And then we want to scroll through here. You can see there's all the different types of storage or things that you can do with your blob storage, but we're going to list the blobs. And then over here, you can see that I've already added the connection for my blob. But again, you would click add new connection here to add your storage account. And again, you give it a name. What is your storage account name, which is intro to big data. And then you'd have to give it that storage access key as well. And then it'd be able to authenticate and with your storage account. And then you would just be able to select it from your connections here. So since I've already done that, if I click on the folder here, I can actually see the storage containers that I already have. So we want to list out from the raw because we want to process our data. So we want to grab our raw data in order to process and extract that information. It's good to save your work as you go too, just in case, you know, it's just a good practice to save as you go. But so then we want to add another step and we want to loop through the blobs that we just added. So we are going to do a apply to each action. So it's a control, is under the control actions, and we want to apply to each. And then within here, we want to grab the value. So you can see the different content that's available from our blob that we could use, that we could loop through and do different processes with. And then the other thing we want to do is copy that to our processed folder. So if I start writing copy here, and then the other thing is I just want to talk through a little bit about how easy it is to create flows and automate your business processes. So things that you think take, you know, a developer to do, you can actually do with maybe a BA resource or a business person resource, and you can really go through and create these really cool machine learning pipelines. So, sorry, the next thing that we want to do now is grab the process, or copy it to the process folders, because when we're done processing it, we're going to delete it from the raw folder and we want to move it to the processed folder. So I want to grab the path to the blob, and then I want to tell it that I want to put it in the processed path. Now I'm going to overwrite here because I've been playing with this data and I know I have some duplicates, but you might want it to not overwrite something that's in there if there's a duplicate name. So you could do no, and if it fails on one of the items in the blob storage, it will just keep going. So you'll see in the output when it's done that there was a failure, but it won't like stall out your whole process if you do. But I'm going to go ahead and say yes, overwrite what's in there. Okay, so the next thing that we want to do is copy the blob content. Okay, so we want to copy the blob content because we want to get like essentially the file stream. So if like you've worked with files in C# or other applications, you need the actual content of the blob. So we're going to grab the content of the path, and that's going to essentially give us the file stream that we're going to post to our machine learning model. So now I'm going to add another one, and I'm going to search again for form recognizer. And then from here, I want to actually analyze the form, right? Because now we want to get the data from our form. So I'm going to go grab my model ID. I'm going to paste that in. I'm going to grab the file content that we got from the previous step. You could add additional keys to extract, but we're good with what we have for our pre-trained model. But maybe if you found an issue later, you know that you need to add something there. And then we have our PDF is our content type. So the type of data that we're actually using is a PDF. So once we process our data, we are going to want to delete out the processed one from the raw because we don't want to process the same one over and over. So we're going to grab the delete blob, and then we are going to add the path to that folder, that file. And so that's going to then delete it out from our raw folder, or our raw container. Cool, so we have now built out our full pipeline here from copying the blob, getting the content. So here's where you would actually add an option for your data source. So maybe you want to put it in SQL. Maybe you want to use an Azure table storage. So as you saw, like in the blob containers, there's also different tables that you can, or tables within blob storage that you can export it to a CSV. I mean, like there's so many different ones that you could use. You could really export it to any data source that you would need for your where you want your raw or your process data to go, and then use it for, you know, your next step, whatever you're going to end up doing with this PDF data. So I can go ahead and run this machine learning model, and it's going to go through each step and of my raw folder here and grab each PDF. It's going to extract the information. It's going to get that JSON of key value pairs from the entities within my invoice data. Cool, so it's successful, and now let's take a look. So if I go to Analyze Form, I can actually see the different pages that were extracted. I can see that it was successful. You can scroll through and grab it, but I think it'll be easier if I bring it over to, oh, and then you can see that my raw files were deleted now. So you can see that that process worked. So I'm going to grab the JSON here, and I'm going to go over to my VS Code. So if you're not familiar with VS Code, it's an IDE, a very lightweight IDE that's free, and I use it all the time. I love it. In mine, you have all these custom themes, so mine's very pink and black because I love pink and black. But anyway, so if you look at the data here, you can see the key values that were extracted. So you can see the name, you can see the bounding box, you can see that the name value was Brian Groth. You can see the address information for the person there, and then if you keep going, you can see the city was Langley, you know, the company information. So there was our company data, the company address. So you're getting all these key value pairs that you can then extract and put into your data source and process your PDFs. So really quick way, without writing any code, to create a data pipeline using Azure Data Lake and processing and making sense of your unstructured data. So we have country. So yeah, all of our information that we needed is here. So another thing I want to show you quickly is our learning platform. So if you're not familiar with Azure or with Microsoft Learn, we have this learning platform that allows you to go learn new skills and how to do different things. So maybe you're new to Power Automate and you're not really sure where to go, where to start. You can go to this learning path, and it will actually have different modules that will bring you step by step on how to learn to use these different technologies. I mean, I've used these for Power Apps and the Common Data Service, and there's more than just that. There's pretty much like anything. There's even like Intro to Python if you want to start learning how to code. So there's a lot of different stuff in here. But I definitely recommend that when we do these talks, they're really much to like introduce you to a concept and show you what's possible, get you thinking about what you're doing in your day-to-day process that you might be able to automate with some of these tools. And so once you have that idea of something that you're like, you know, yeah, I do this repetitive thing every day and I should probably automate it, you can come in here and you can see and better understand how you can do that, how you can apply these processes and these tools in order to, you know, make your life better, to automate things that you don't want to have to do repetitively. So I am going to pass it back to Adi here. So I'll stop sharing. And then Adi, if you want to share your screen.
All right. Yeah, thank you, Cassie. It was super interesting. As a software developer, doing this kind of transformation takes a long time and a lot of testing and a lot of putting everything together. And you just did it in, I don't know, 10 minutes.
Oh my gosh, I have done that from scratch, and it took a long time I did in C#, and then I had to grab my data from the C#, using a C# library from the PDF, and then cleaning it and then processing it. And I don't even think I went to the entity extraction piece. So there's a lot that is just made easy through these tools that we have.
Wow, that's fantastic. Okay, so like Cassie showed you, we have a lot more material. So if you want to check out the Power Automate and the Power Platform, please go to aka.ms/LearnPA. If you want to learn how to work with data, potentially big data, go to aka.ms/data guide. And if you're totally new to working with the cloud and you want to learn about the concept and what does it mean to work with a public cloud, we have a learning path that is free for you, and that will be aka.ms Start with the Cloud. And we will share this presentation on our Twitter accounts. Both me and Cassie will share it afterwards, so you have all the links and everything available for you. And yeah, now we are happy to take your questions.